Okay, everyone. Welcome to our session on toxin handling for the HR professional. I am so excited to share this topic with you because it's such an important one, and yet one that we don't get a lot of, there's not a lot of information about out there in the world. So a little bit about both Chris and I. So my name is Alessandria Polizzi, Dr. Al. I own Verdant Consulting. We focus on resiliency skills and psychological safety within the workplace. And we provide programs like this one for HR teams and leaders. Chris?
Hey, I'm Chris Gray. I'm a consultant, HR consultant by trade, HR medic, own and operate HR medic. We focus a lot on HR development, a lot on self-care and well-being within the workplace, and do a bit of qualitative research and evaluation work as well. So I want to ask a few questions as we kind of get going to talk about toxin handling, and this can be put in the chat box, or if you'd like to put yourself on camera. I even fixed my hair today for this call, so we'd love for you to be on camera with us. But I'm gonna read off a few events, and if you're in HR, you may have done some of these, you may not, and so it will kind of set us up for discussing toxin handling and what all that means. So as HR, think about this and let me know if you've done them. Reorganizations, employee complaints, implementing policy changes. Here's one: dealing with an upset employee for whatever reason, because they weren't selected for a position or because they were passed over for a promotion. Conflicts between manager and employee, and HR kind of gets sucked into it. You know, employee says, I'm not happy with my manager because of X, Y, and Z. Personal issues related to the employees, i.e. the death of a loved one, or a change in benefits because of a divorce or a marriage or a child. So we can think of kind of these personal situations. And the last one, communicating undesirable news to employees on behalf of the organization. So if you've done any of these, so if you've done all of these, let us know. I'm seeing some comments in the chat box that you've all done all of these, some of these. Does anybody want to take themselves off mute and say? Okay, so as we keep moving forward, this is going to start to set the stage of what toxin handling is. And I want you to get a mental picture in your head, literally a mental picture of someone carrying toxic chemicals, someone carrying something that is considered toxic, right? Whenever we think about this, and I come from a healthcare setting, in our radiology department, they use certain chemicals in order to do certain images, right? And so they have to have protective equipment. They have to have the gloves and the. For me, hairnet doesn't necessarily apply, but they have to have the scrubs and all of that, right? Well, you know, in HR, we deal with toxic situations, and so that's the premises behind this. It has an impact on those. If we don't take care of ourselves, if we're not mindful, it has an impact on us and we don't even realize it, right? So here we are handling these toxic chemicals. It has an impact on us and we don't realize it. So this is kind of the formal definition. It's those in the organization who have an emotional intelligence to read and interpret the emotional needs of others, who help absorb negativity. Because of our role in HR and because of how much we care about the organization, we find ourselves dealing with this type work. You may say, well, Chris, it's just part of Chris and now it's just part of working in HR. It is, but if we don't recognize it, and if we don't take care of it, if we don't address it, it could have a career ending, it could have a burnout, it could really impact our own personal well-being, and it does. A study that's on the screen now said upwards of 80% of HR managers deal with toxic situations, toxic environments, are considered toxin handlers. Toxin handlers are those that deal with it. Toxic emotions is the actual product or the actual situation that they're dealing with. I think 80% is probably a pretty conservative estimate based on the chat box. All of us have done with all of these things, right? It's just part and parcel with being in the occupation. Now I'll turn the mic back over to Al.
Thanks, Chris. This is so much fun presenting with you too, because you have all this knowledge. It's amazing. So a couple studies I want to share with you. One looked at, you saw one there that Chris was referring to out of Spain. There was another one that came out about a year ago that showed about 7 out of 10 HR professionals were feeling that they didn't have, they weren't thriving, that they didn't have strong well-being in the work that they do. And at that time, about the same percentage was experiencing symptoms of burnout. Now, many of you have heard me talk about this before, but a recent study came out about, now it's a couple months ago, that showed that a percentage of HR was burnt out. Look, let's go to the chat and put in your guesses. What percent of HR do you believe was burnt out according to this recent study? It was in Forbes, a bunch of different magazines, HR Drive, a bunch of different magazines. So let's get some guesses in the chat. 75%, 85, 65%. It was actually almost 100%. It was 98% of people had in HR had in this study of, I think it was like 500 people, US and the UK had experienced symptoms of burnout in the last 6 months. Okay. So we need to, I can share links to those studies. What I'll do is I will email them out afterwards, Susan, if that's okay, because otherwise you'll have to watch me do it and it'll be boring. Okay. But yes, absolutely. So what I say about the HR function, and this is why I focus a lot of my energy for the work that we do in my company on HR teams, because we experience all the same things as our employees do, right? The impact of ongoing pandemic reform and laws, the social unrest that we experience in the United States in particular, and then some of the things that have been coming out where we have to pivot and pivot and pivot. So employees are reacting to it. We have to help shepherd it. And then we have to be in the front of it, right? So what I say is, it's like the Ann Richards quote, which is, we're like Ginger Rogers. We're doing the same moves, but backwards and in heels. So we have to help others while we're also going through, I love that image, Chris, of the toxin, carrying the gloves and which we don't wear our PPE, right? Because we don't realize that what we're touching can actually harm us. So I've been so focused on this. Earlier in the year, we hosted a well-being conference, and I posted this to see, out of curiosity, what were people doing as we entered into 2022 within their HR teams to help the well-being of their HR team. Nothing is the answer to that question. So hopefully attending things like this will help give you some skills and resources to be able to do more, because like Chris said, as HR professionals, we tend to think, well, that's just the job, right? This is fine. But it's not. And it's not that we have to stop doing those things, but what we need to do is have that proper protective equipment, which is some of the things we're going to talk about, to help us handle that and recognize when the things we're dealing with are toxic. So let's talk a little bit about burnout and HR. I usually have people guess what year this came out, but I gave it away. So all the way back in 1992, so 30 years ago, we were talking about burnout and HR. So what we're talking about isn't new. And it's not something that's just a result of COVID. What we're talking about had nothing to do with COVID. It has to do with the everyday demands of the job. So what we're going to do is a little quiz. So everyone pull out a piece of paper and a pen, or use your phone. And we're going to go through a series of questions that will give us, thanks, Chris, will give us insight into whether or not you could be among those who are handling toxins. Okay, so 1 through 5. So 1 is never, 5 is very often. So the first one, I lose interest in interacting with others. So never or very often. I worry that, I should say this job is hardening me emotion-wise. Never or very often? I feel like my workplace is toxic. Pretty straightforward. I don't think positively about my job. I don't feel like I have anyone to talk to. I feel unappreciated or undervalued. People or issues easily get on my nerves. I feel low physical or emotional energy. I can be unpleasant with people when they don't deserve it. I seem to be forgetting things or not as sharp as I once was. I don't feel like I'm winning as much as I would like. I'm unclear or confused about what I need to do at work. Okay, so calculate those up, add those up. If you'd like, you can share your score in the chat. You don't have to. But these, and this is not a true diagnosis. This is just some questions that give us insight into what the risk of potential burnout or toxin handling could look like for you. So what kind of risks do you have? Anyone feel like sharing their total? Chris, did you take it?
I did. Yes. 40, 36. Oh, wow. 31. So everyone so far is right in this 30 to 41 range.
Yeah, we're in that risk.
24, Kathy's
doing good.
Doing good.
So there's more we could do about understanding whether or not we handle toxins. What Chris mentioned at the beginning, those are examples of the kinds of things, the kinds of interactions that have been identified as toxins in the workplace because of the weight and the emotional strain that those can have on us as humans. So Chris is going to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah. And so this is a good chance for us to just kind of take a step back and really would like to hear from someone in the group, just kind of how you are, what kind of stuck out, what has stand out to you so far in terms of thinking about toxic emotions or toxin handling. Is it a surprise to you that you do this, or this can have an effect on you? Is it a surprise that we even talk about this? I'd love to just hear some feedback from someone, just kind of a pulse check of where we are to this point.
Hi, Amy.
Hello. Thank you. I'm really enjoying this session. And it actually occurred to me when my boyfriend asked me after a long day, like, hey, let's go out. Let's go to the club. We belong to a local sportsman's club. And it's like, no, I don't want to be around people, was my answer. And I don't think I've ever bet. I never realized that would ever be an issue for me. That's really where I thrive. And I love being around people. And it was just my truth. And I stayed home. In fact, for the whole weekend, I really recharged. It was great. But at first I felt bad. And then I was like, it's okay. It took me a while to just accept that was okay.
Yeah.
And good for you for doing that too. Because if you ignore that, what can happen?
Right. Oh, I have in the past. So I think sessions like this have helped me navigate through that. In fact, I'll admit I calculated my number wrong. I'm at 44. Mm-hmm. And this is going into this session thinking that I really have embraced. I mean, I've listened to Dr. Al's webinars a lot. She's speaking at our upcoming HR groups meeting. It's like I feel like I have a really good handle on this, but the reality is still the same.
Yeah. And the reality is that some of the work we do as HR professionals, just in and of itself, has a weight to it that we have to just plan, and a toxicity to it that we just have to plan for and understand how we recharge. So that's fantastic that you've been listening to that. Sorry, Chris.
No, you're to add on, kind of echo what's being said. it is part of being in HR, and a lot of the literature research that's been done around this suggests that this is a part of HR. We don't, it's not saying that it goes away, like communicating bad news to employees. We just know that that's part of HR, or selecting people for positions. That's part of HR, and we're going to be the ones telling the non-selectees, what the decision was. But to y'all's point, if that is a part of HR and we're not recognizing it and we're not protecting ourselves against it, then that's where it can start to eat at us. And I think maybe to Amy's point, personal example of mine, I would be just so grouchy at like 2017, 2018, right when I was starting my doctorate degree. It really kind of hit home. Like I was bringing all of this home, and my family was like, "Man, you're a grouch." And I'm like, "Thanks, I love you too." But when you start to look back at it, it's like, why? And stress will do that. Toxin handling will do that. And this is not, we're talking about this in HR. And Peter Frost, the kind of the founder of this term, he was looking at general organizational issues, just kind of globally, and where Al and I are specifically looking at human resources, but other occupations deal with this as well, especially within healthcare, especially because of COVID. What makes ours unique is that the confidential nature of HR, the confidential, nature of our work, and it's just part of the job, means that we don't do a good job naming it and recognizing it and identifying it. So then we don't do something about it, and it eats at us and eats at us and eats at us. So thank you. All right, so let's talk a little specifically about these attributes, and then we're going to start talking about, well, what do we do about it? I mean, here you are talking about toxin handling. Well, what do we do about it? So let's talk about some of these attributes, and then we'll move on to talk about the antidote. We are often the bearer of bad news, and these are some quotes that came from some studies that have been done. HR is predominantly given the task of breaking bad news. This is because we often need to be tactful and empathetic as possible. So we're kind of extending, if there's one thing that HR does, it's we care about the employees and the organization that we support, right? And if you're here on this call, you can probably identify, if you're listening to this, you can identify HR will often overextend ourselves because we care. That's where being empathetic to the employee and the organization, trying to balance the two, can put us in the middle of it. Next slide. Lack of role clarity. I don't know if it's like this on your job description if you're listening to this, but those other duties as assigned sure tend to take up a lot of time. They're never, but you know what? It's HR finds ourselves trying to be everything to everyone. I always just kind of like to joke and say, we're not a donut. We can't make everyone happy. But we do, right? I mean, you think about it. And if you're listening, let us know in the chat box or say, yeah, that's me. Because we're like a one-stop shop. Supervisors come, and if it's HR related or not, they say, hey, I need your help on X, Y, and Z. We're expected to drop what we're doing and help them. Employees, same thing. If they're in a life crisis or in a significant event, they're going to run to HR and say, hey, I need help. And each one of those situations are very important, right? And very significant. But when you're talking about an organization of hundreds and thousands of employees, that kind of stuff happens frequently, and they're not small things. So the lack of role clarity can also be weighing in and of itself for us. Loneliness. This is where I think we're unique among many occupations, because we sometimes feel like we're fighting these battles alone. At least within kind of the organization, and it's not often recognized because of the confidential nature of the topic. So an employee comes and let's say they're getting a divorce or something like that, and we've got to deal with all that. I remember one time, just as in the personal example, the employee came and they said, I've got to get a restraining order because my boyfriend or my ex keeps coming to the workplace and harassing me. Listen, obviously is not something I can just share and talk about, with others and decompress from that. So that's just an example of how confidential our work can be. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. So it can often feel like we fight these battles alone. HR feels like we can't talk about it. I think we need to get over that. I think we can be confidential while discussing, while debriefing, especially if it's been a significant event. I'm sure Al has had, and I have had as a consultant, we've talked to HR professionals before that's lost an employee, and they had to deal with that within the organization, and they just kind of needed to decompress and discuss it, because that's hard. That's hard or a significant injury on the job site, or something a little more recent and a little more relevant to some of the restructurings or the mergers and acquisitions that can take place. We're at the driver's seat of those things, and those are hard to navigate through, and we often feel like we have to navigate them kind of on our own, or when we do, we can't really share or decompress from it. Let me make sure I get this real clear. If we don't deal with the stress, if we don't deal with the toxicity, if we don't deal with it, then it's going to continue to grow. It's going to continue to kind of fester. It either grows or it's transferred. So it either grows within us, and it can cause us to be depressed, anxious, some of those things. So it can grow with us, or it can be transferred. I would transfer it to my loved ones because I get grouchy, and come home and kind of be irritable. Or again, transferred, or it can kind of grow within us. Sorry, keep going.
No, that's great. Well, because I want to stick on loneliness before we go to the next one. So in the chat, what are some biases or things that people think or say about HR? But why don't you share some? When you walk into a room and people go, oh, HR is here. Yep, we're the police. Yep. Principal's office. Mm-hmm. Oh, be careful, HR is here. Yep.
That is true.
Yeah. Okay.
Stop talking, or can't say such and such.
Right.
Yeah.
So talk about lonely. When you walk in a room and like the air goes out of it, or people like change as a result of you entering it, that makes you feel distanced. Yes, thanks, Katie. Because that increases the loneliness, right? So one of the things that can also impact is this feeling of being the bad guy. So put a exclamation point in the chat if you've ever had a manager or a leader say, well, I did this because of HR. Yeah. So leaders, they blame HR for difficult decisions. I mean, I remember we implemented a new performance rating, right? And we had to start doing calibration. And people were like, well, I had to rate you this because of calibration. Like, no, you rated them because that's how their performance was relative to their peers. But, go talk to HR, right? I'm not the bad guy. And so that having to be the villain in the story, like that has a weight to it, that impacts our psyche, and that can be toxic.
Can I add one thing to that?
Oh, absolutely. Please.
I have heard it described that we're often the bearer of bad news, or we're being the bad guy, or things are being blamed on us, but yet we're not invited to the birthday parties, or the other things. And just exactly what you're saying is, we're part of the hard decisions, the bad guy,
yes, we have
but we don't get the cake and ice cream we're not invited to the company party or the office party, and
or we're in charge of it, but we don't get invited to the after party.
That's right. And that's right.
Where all the fun stuff goes down. Yeah. Thanks for that in the chat. Yeah. Well, I mean, and the other thing about HR is it's easy to blame and difficult to credit. This is what I used to say about my work, right? So when it's going well, what a fantastic leader. When it's going poorly, HR sucks. And so, yeah, so that's one. And, my friend Hannah, she shares a story in reference to this about when she was out in public and she saw people that she had to let go because of a riff. And it was just like, she represented the company in that decision. And it was just a lot for her.
Mhm.
This always on nature of the work we do. If there's something goes down, they need to get a hold of HR. And of course they should, because that is our job, right? So I'm not saying that any of these things should necessarily, we're going to, go out and have these all stop, but we need to understand that there's a weight with that can be toxic. And there's been studies done on people who have to be always on, people who are having to be just ready at the drop of a hat, that can decrease our overall well-being and have a negative impact on us psychologically. The other thing is the problem focus of the job. So do people necessarily come to HR when things are going well, or when the team's really having a great time, or like when things are really working well? Probably not. It feels like, unless it's a promotion and then they want to need it tomorrow. Sometimes it just feels like people want to talk to us only when there's a problem. So but here's the thing, a lot of us love to solve problems. So, we want to be there, we want to help things, but we have to just pay attention to, if we're constantly serving others, do we leave enough space to take care of ourselves? And again, Chris and I are going to go through some actions you can take and what you can do. So Chris, I think I hand over to you here.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've talked a lot about, the hard part of working in HR and what impact that it can have. Now let's switch gears a little bit. We know this is part of our job, as Al said, and I've said, it's not going away. I don't see, a lot is changing in HR, but I think we'll still be the ones doing this type of work, rightfully so, because we care about the organization. Now let's switch and talk about, what can we do to take care of this weight? What can we do to take care of this impact? Or I just want a visual of, let's start to put on our protective equipment. Let's start to put on our PPE. We know it's there. Let's put on the proper PPE. First, let's talk about taking a break. There's something to be said, and always being on, as Al had said, we can't be on all the time. It's just impossible. And research actually suggests that if you try to be on all the time, it will significantly decrease your productivity, just without a doubt. So the research suggests that either the company's going to have a decrease in your productivity, either by you actually taking a break and you come back and you're more productive, or your productivity is just going to decrease if you try to be on all the time. So point is, it's going to happen, meaning productivity is going to decrease if you don't stop and take a break. And obviously your health and well-being is going to take an impact as well. So next one.
Oh, hey, real quick before we move on.
Yeah,
so
go ahead.
Here are some recommendations I have for taking a break, if I can add.
Please.
One is, put that in your calendar. Block 30 minutes or 15 minutes on your calendar. That's your take a break time. Find times that you aren't doing other things to practice self-care. We'll talk about that in a little bit. To just do a check-in. How am I doing? What do I need? Maybe when you're waiting for something to come off the printer, when you're waiting for other people to dial into a meeting, don't check an email. That's your minute. So find those tiny little breaks throughout the day. Okay, those are my 2 tips for taking a break.
Yeah, and to add to that, it kind of made me think, one thing I really like to do now, I know COVID, I've been working virtually for a long time. So pre-COVID, not everybody was on video, but now during our COVID came and everybody's on video. But if in the event I have an actual phone call and I use it, I like to take walks, so I'll be on the phone and I just walk just to get my legs stretching. I'm a guy, I can't multitask very well. So if I'm like on the phone trying to check an email, one of the 2 is going to be ignored. And I'm not really good at bluffing when I'm ignoring the person talking on the phone. So I try to get away from the computer and just kind of walk around in order to take a break. It's amazing to me, talking about breaks, one more thing just to say, is how many of us don't actually take a lunch break. Like just a back of the napkin poll one time, and I would say upwards of 90% of an audience is like, yeah, we don't actually take a lunch break. We eat while we're working, or we don't eat at all, and we just work straight through it. It just kind of blew my mind because I don't miss many meals, but I do find myself eating and working, and that's just not very. It leads to this. It's not very intentional. I am a big fan of setting boundaries, and I am a big fan of being intentional. Again, we're not donuts. We can't be everything to everyone. This is where HR, when we think about how we can address toxin handling, is we need to communicate what we are responsible for. And it's okay to say no. I get it. We're here for the organization. We're here to support employees. We're here to take care of those we work for. But if we try to be everything to everyone, we're going to end up being nothing to no one, meaning it can't be an expectation that we always drop everything we're doing in order to deal with every crisis. Then that policy is not going to be updated. That job's not going to be posted, right? And one survey or one research, published research, actually suggested that upwards of 30 to 40% of our time is dealing with these toxic type situations, right? So this is where being intentional and actually setting boundaries really comes into play and becomes mighty important. Again, I know the expectation is that we're everything to everyone, but proactively communicating what we are responsible for and how to properly kind of engage and communicate with us can go a long ways. And getting management support on that to say, hey, you know, HR has a big load. They got a lot of important work going on, but they actually have to have time to be able to do it. And that's not a bad thing. That's just us being real. We have to do that in our personal lives, or we'd be taken advantage of, right? And we also need to think about doing that in our business lives as well.
If I can add one on the being intentional.
Yeah,
Well, sorry, Chris, I keep coming up with ideas.
I'm glad.
Oh, thanks, Amy. So the other thing is, if we know we're going to have a bunch of toxic work, maybe there's that leader that just, you just know who I'm talking about. The one you just like, I can't. Make sure that you block time after that interaction, or that that be intentional about giving yourself the space to recover, to recuperate. So be very thoughtful about, if I am going to have this really intense situation, I'm having a riff, I have, some difficult conversations to have, I'm not going to also go afterwards to a happy hour, not for me, because I know that would be a nightmare combination. So just be thoughtful and intentional about your needs before and after those events. Sorry, go ahead, Chris.
Two things I would say here: get support when you need it. I'm a big fan of peer support, debriefs, especially when we've been through difficult situations or projects, or rifts or mergers, acquisitions, big changes in policy. And over the last few months, we've certainly seen that in what year are we in? 2022. I've certainly seen its share of seismic events socially that has had a real impact. And I think for us to not address that as an organization and as a profession is just ignoring the problem. And again, problems can't be ignored. They're either going to fester themselves within us and kind of can grow and spread and impact us personally, or it will be transferred to those around us. So I'm a big fan of peer support, and that's just sitting around and authentically and truthfully and in a safe space addressing it. Say, hey, what was it about that had an impact on you? It's not an opportunity. And I just want to stress that when you're doing that and kind of having these debriefs, it's not so I can say, hey, Al, you should have done things differently. Man, you missed opportunity there. No, it's just to voice it and say, that was hard. Letting that employee go was hard. Or seeing that person and knowing that they have to move across country for this job is tough. And kind of speaking to that in and of itself is therapeutic for us. Two, is know when to get professional help. reaching out and saying, look, this work has an impact on me so much so that I need professional help is it's just good for you. Knowing when to reach out rather than internalizing it to where it will again result in you leaving your job or transferring, or worse, just being unproductive, unhappy, and just kind of miserably sitting there. Being in HR, we often know of the resources that employees have, and yet we're unwilling to accept those same resources ourselves. A lot of EAP programs, I'm not familiar with everyone's EAP program on the phone, on the video today, but most EAP programs have some type of counseling component to it. I actually have my sister's an EAP counselor, and we talk about this, that, you know, it's not uncommon for her to get referrals for employees that are just stressed out, that are really going through something. Well, why can't we do that as HR? And you can, and it's wise to proactively take care of that before it gets to a point where you're leaving or you're just miserable. So know when to get support, and don't be afraid to reach out. Again, it's part of our job. If we don't take care of ourselves, then it will have lasting impacts on us. Which leads to this next one: establishing healthy boundaries. Actually, just posted a video a little bit about this today. Establishing healthy boundaries, and establishing healthy boundaries allows us to decide what is most important to us as an organization, as a function. Again, we have to sit with the fact for a little bit that we can't be everything to everybody. I know that is the expectation, but learning to say no is good for you and is good for your department. If you're an HR leader, kind of leading from the front and communicating that will be good for your staff. Because let's kind of play the reverse here. If I'm always willing to address every crisis, and I know that there are legitimate crises that happen, then that gives permission to them for there always to be a crisis. That gives permission for there always to be an open door where it's an expectation that I drop what I'm doing, regardless of what I'm doing, and people are allowed to come in and upheaval my entire day. We've talked to people through doing research around this, that they say their entire day, and let me know if in the chat box, please, your entire day can be completely rearranged within 15 minutes of walking in the door. An overnight issue happened, or someone's waiting for you. It always used to get me. I would, back when I worked in an office, someone would be there waiting for me to arrive, and I thought, I need to divert and get a cup of coffee first, right? Because I know as soon as I set down my stuff, that my whole day was about to be rearranged, right? And sometimes a line at the door, sometimes you've had people waiting for you, right? I'm a big fan, we're talking about solutions now. I'm a big fan of protected time, but meaning what is protected time? Between these hours, I'm going to focus. HR can be very analytical, especially when we talk about updating policies and some of the research that we have to do. So HR can be very analytical, and I like protected time. Saying between these hours, right? It's not an open door, and I'm going to focus on this. And as an HR leader, we recommend this and advocate for it because it also allows your employees between these hours, open, call them office hours, come. They can come and we can discuss. But I think this is really helpful in terms of starting to set some expectations. You're like, Chris, well, that will never fly. That's where communicating this comes in handy. And it's really important that you communicate this and say, these are our expectations. We're here to serve you. We're here to help you. But we're not here to be taken advantage of, because it has an impact on our staff. It also has an impact on our productivity. Next. Practice acceptance. This, and I know we're going to be running out of time here, so I'll continue to move through. Practice acceptance. This is really important. We're just recognizing the work in and of itself. And kind of sitting with it. We can't ignore it. If we do, it won't be ignored. It's going to present itself through various other ways: stress or burnout or anxiety or depression. We've heard some more severe ones where people can start to practice unhealthy habits like not sleeping well at night, or turning to alcohol, something, or eating something like that, right? But just kind of sitting with it and knowing that this is upwards of 30 to 40% of our job. The average HR professional does toxic handling work 30 to 40% of the time. Management may not know we do it. I think as an HR leader, it's important that we socialize that with management and help them understand what we actually do. Again, we're not just the party bus. We're not just the party of no. We're not just pushing papers. This is really what we do, and I think that helps the organization. But you know what? It also helps us understand just how important. It's hard to quantify a lot of this. How do you quantify a conversation with an employee? Someone's thinking about going through a significant family event and they need someone to counsel them and talk to them. So it's hard to quantify this, but this is where people operations comes in. This is really the meat and potatoes of caring for your organization. This is where the human within human resources comes. And this is a mighty important thing. I think COVID was a highlighter of this, because a lot of this work came up over and over again, especially as employees. One thing that maybe Alice saw it before I did, because she's been an independent consultant longer than I have. But a lot of people was really concerned about the vaccine mandates and coming to work when they had to, because of this. And how does HR sit with that, right? So just recognizing it and knowing that this is there in and of itself can go a long ways. Next.
Oops, sorry.
Nope, that's okay. Yeah, so I'll make this one short. I said the last one I would make it short. Practicing the basic self-care, and I think that's the next one as well, can go a long way. Just the little things like getting up and exercising, making sure that we eat healthy, making sure that we actually take, someone said in the chat box, and I really appreciate that, they actually have on their calendar and they actually take a lunch each day. Get up and walk around. In more severe times, before I broke my Apple Watch, I had a nice Apple Watch that was given to me as a gift, and I thought it would be a good idea to go swimming with it. And I found out it was not waterproof, but it would remind me every hour to get up and stretch, to get up and move my legs, to get up and get my blood pumping. And you say, well, Chris, that sounds all great, nice and hunky-dory. But I'm here to tell you, it really does have an impact on us. Even deep breathing, and this goes into the self-care. Never in a million years that I think I would do meditation or deep breathing, but I tried it as I was studying this, and as I was learning more about toxic emotions several years ago. I must tell you, afterwards, it was like, you know what? That's kind of nice. I actually do feel better. I had a psychologist tell me one time, and she actually went through the scientific side of it to prove why deep breathing really does release stress. And it's something around your belly, and you're breathing a different way, and it sends an impulse to your brain, and it actually really does have an impact on us from a physical perspective. Not only does it just feel better, so things like breathing, meditation, yoga. Here's the thing about self-care, and I'll say this and then I'll stop talking. Self-care doesn't have to be this big, long journey. A little bit of self-care can go a long ways. 10 minutes here, even a 3 or 4 minute breathing exercise can. One thing I like to do as an example, before a big call or maybe something I'm nervous about, I'll meditate for 3 to 5 minutes. It's a bazillion meditation videos out there, and Al's going to actually share some really nice resources here towards the end. But just a few minutes can go a long ways, and it can kind of help calm me down. I can be intentional. I can think, okay, this is what I really need to focus on, rather than everything just kind of coming all at once. And that's where anxiety and that's where being overwhelmed can come into play. And it's just not a good feeling. So that's all I'll say about self-care, because we could go on and on and on about that. I think this is yours.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you, Chris. So, so part of acceptance is identifying what you can and cannot control, right? So accepting what I can't control. I can't control that that person thinks of, that they react the way that I do, that they do, what they think, and so one of the things you can listen to though is yourself. So if you feel the need, like Amy was sharing, I don't feel like being around people, listening to yourself is a great way to be able to refill your cup, right? So that you can help others. This is a big one. We are often unkind to ourselves, right? We hold ourselves to a bar. Well, I should be available. Well, this shouldn't bother me because it's the job. We get into the space of being critical, self-critical, and that's our brains doing what they were designed to do, which is to keep an eye out for the negative. And that maybe worked for us in the past, right? If I fix this thing, then everything else will be better. Practicing self-compassion or being kind to ourselves, speaking to ourselves with, as we would a dear friend or a loved one, that has been scientifically proven to help us improve our overall well-being, our life satisfaction, and our ability to care for others. So whenever we spend time focusing on being kind to ourselves, then we feed that part of the brain and activate that part of the brain that's connected with nurturing and caring for others, and positive connection. So give yourself a break.
That's
Take up
a
space.
commercial. Give yourself a break of that Kit Kat bar. I think.
Yes, that's, I think it's give me a break.
There you go.
Okay, take up space. So for HR, sometimes we can feel like we are the forgotten department, the hidden department, the ones that don't get thought of or mentioned. Like even as Chris was saying, oh, well, we have to, pay attention to the stress of HR. And I think how many executives would really actually want to have that conversation? So, because that's this mindset that we get. So take up space, right? There you can do some physical things to take up space. Just spread out, because when we enclose on ourselves, that's a fear response. So even standing with our hands on our hips, the superhero stance, can help us start to recover a little bit. So take up space, be bold, say the things that need to be said. Because here's the thing, if something were to happen with your job as a result of you standing up for your values, you did the right thing. And so feel empowered to take up space and be bold. Speaking of values. So this is one that we often forget, which is being grounded in what's important to us as individuals. And these change over time, just like your boundaries, right? So some people boundaries, some people have very strong time boundaries, right? I don't want to spend a lot of time on this or a lot of time on that. Other people don't, and that's okay. But knowing what your boundaries are and also your values, what's important to you, that will help you make a decision when you feel overwhelmed or you feel like you've been, spending time on the wrong things, or you want to recover from a very difficult situation. So making sure that you understand what's important to you and that you lean in on that is a great way to bounce back from toxins. Be patient with yourself. Some days you're going to feel like crap. That's okay. Some days you're going to have a bad day. That's okay. Setting boundaries is hard because it puts you at risk of rejection. It puts you at risk of people not paying attention to those. It puts you at risk of being hurt. So be patient with yourself and take little steps to make changes if you feel like you're in a situation that's not healthy for you right now. A little is a lot over time. And expect to make mistakes. Perfectionism is so rampant throughout HR because it's high risk, right? If we make the wrong decision, there can be huge financial impact to the business. I get it. And a lot of people are looking to us to have the answers to very difficult, and in the last 3 years, very unclear and chaotic situations. There's no way you can do that flawlessly. So expect that you will make mistakes, and try to use them as learning opportunities. And sometimes we don't handle the toxins well. Sometimes maybe they hit on trauma from us, or for us from our past, or it's just a thing we feel uncomfortable with. We're not sure, we're unclear. That's okay.
I think sometimes, to that, there's almost like this unwritten expectation that you just grin and bear it, and just go through it. COVID, I remember the very beginning of COVID and just how HR was being forced to kind of respond to so much that was going on. And because we're part of the organization, it's just like, well, grin and bear it, regardless of what impact it has on you or how you personally feel about it, right? And that takes a toll on you. We can call that moral distress, where we're doing something that we don't necessarily feel is right in our heart of hearts, and yet we're doing it. And that disconnect can really have an effect on you.
Another term, I feel like we might have another presentation ahead of us. Okay. Create psychological safety. Lots of buzzwords about psychological safety. Psychological safety is the ability to ask questions and take risk without fear of negative repercussions. So it doesn't have to be overly complicated, but that means that you're okay making mistakes. And so do that, make that safe for others too. Give other people opportunity to learn from mistakes, right? To ask questions. And then on your team, if you're a leader, even if you're not, oh, thanks, Katie. Take the time to learn about creating a psychological safety on your team or within your project or among your peers. We're actually going to be wrapping up with a few more resources for you. So Kite, the Kite program, which they produce well-being micro-learning apps. We have one specifically for HR. So this one, you can go to the Kite program website. And that has a specific focus on the needs and well-being of HR. So Kite HR. We have a HR well-being LinkedIn group with about 250 members. So talk about finding the people that you want to connect with and who can share and relate. That's a great group. Ben Eubanks puts on something called summer camp, or he has these different groups. So if you check out Ben Eubanks, he always has something interesting going on. And also we have, you can hold an offsite for your HR team. I've done that for a couple of HR teams, and it's been really nice for them to step away and get some time together. And we did a couple of these types of activities, and we built on that. Go to training like you're doing. And then somebody mentioned getting a coach. There are coaches for everything now. Coaches for weight loss, coaches for HR, like myself. There's coaches for parenting. If there's something that you're struggling with, there's a coach out there for you. So it doesn't have to be, price prohibitive. So those are a few resources as we wrap up. I know a few people are having to drop off, but Chris, any final words of wisdom for the group?
No, I appreciate everyone attending today and for the lively discussion. Such an important thing. Obviously, Al and I are passionate HR professionals who simply want to support you in the work that you do, because we've been through it, and have the scars to prove it. So we hope that there's lessons learned that can be applied so that we can thrive, so that our hive can thrive.
Thanks, Chris. Well, thanks everyone for joining. We'll follow up with an email. I'll send that link to the study that I mentioned earlier. And with that, everybody take 4 minutes and practice one of the tips you learned, right? Do some breathing, take up some space, do some kindness to yourself. And with that, everybody, thanks so much. Bye.